Hello.
There we go.
You're here.
I'm here.
I don't know how we should do this.
In no particular order. Yeah.
Well, take a seat, any seat.
Yeah. As far as possible. Yeah. So you have a seat. Okay. Good evening, everybody. We're going to try that one more time. Good evening, everybody. There we go. Because we're here with some energy. Those of us who are here at All Saints Church here in Pasadena, California, and we know we have about 1,000 of you who are registered and watching us online, and maybe more than that. And that just makes my heart full, because what we are here for this evening is important. It's also exciting, because it's about the power that we have to make a difference and to preserve our democracy. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector, which is the senior pastor here at All Saints Church. And please know that whether you are participating with us online or here at All Saints Church, that we are so grateful that you are here and part of this important conversation. If you're here in the room, slightly less important than preserving our democracy, but important still, is where the bathrooms are. And so if you need to use a restroom, just go out here to the building here. It's called Rica's House. Walk right in the door. The bathrooms are directly on your right. There are also, if you are here, there are Q&A cards that will be available. If you have a question for the panel, we'll make sure you get one of those, and those will be collected, and that's how we'll be doing Q&A. And I want to keep my introduction as brief as that, because we really want to get to the panel and the conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over to a dear friend of All Saints Church, Amy Landecker.
Wow. I feel extremely powerful up here. Hi, I'm Amy Landecker. I am married to Bradley Whitford, which comes into play as to why we're here. I went to high school with Rachel Lazar, who runs Americans United. And through conversations with Rachel, through a high school reunion and a friend, and she approached me basically to get to my husband, who's on Handmaid's Tale. But we'll get to that. But she asked if Bradley and I would be interested in doing work for this organization, and I told her that it is literally a topic of conversation at our house many, many nights. I feel like this issue is one of the most important issues that faces our country, and that sort of umbrellas a lot of other issues. And, you know, as the granddaughter of a German Jew who escaped during World War II, I am very aware of what happens when religion and government start combining, and what can happen when there's a void in society for them to enter. And I want us to really make sure that that void is closed. And I think AU is a great organization to do that. And literally, Ben Wexler, who is Rachel's cousin, said, "Can't you find someone on Handmaid's Tale to be the celebrity face of AU?" And I happen to be married to Commander Lawrence. So I will turn it over to the commander under his eye and the panel. Oh, and I forgot to mention Traci Blackmon and Bradley and I lobbied in DC with Rachel, and it was Traci's incredible. I cannot wait to hear from this whole panel. So you're in good hands.
Blessed be the fruit. I'm thrilled to be here. I feel compelled to sort of, I think everyone here is representing a religious point of view. This place has been a nourishing, safe spot. I just want to explain how I come to this conversation and how I came to this church. I was raised by a wonderful woman whose only request was that her obituary say proud atheist. But I was raised Quaker, which may seem complicated if you don't know the Quakers. My mother was very skeptical of organized religion. I think the way she put it was, I don't want a man in a costume telling me what is holy, which is why we became Quaker. So I was raised in this very skeptical Quaker upbringing that felt profoundly moved by, how do I put this, the values of Christianity without the Christology, I guess would be the way that we'd put it. I found myself coming here because I saw a lot of the values I believed in being put into action at this place. I struggled with it, wandered in to the rector's office and said, I don't know if it's okay for me to be here, even though I find communion deeply moving. And he basically said, for some people it can be more nourishing if you don't believe a conventional God exists, that to realize that you have to make it happen, which was a very nourishing answer for me. Anyway, I go to Quaker meeting, I come here, I love the community here. I am terrified about the weaponization of right-wing white nationalism, right-wing Christianity. I've always been upset that the only voices that we tend to hear that are in such opposition to my experiences of the values that are practiced here are voices of condemnation and exclusion, and they have been weaponized to a very dangerous point here. Anyway, I'm talking too much. We were talking before we came out here, and I can tell you, I'm sure this will be a lively discussion. This is Rachel Lazar. She is President and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. If you're interested in these issues, there is no better vehicle for you to get involved with. You've seen her speaking in front of the Supreme Court and Congress. You've seen her writing in all major news outlets, including Washington Post, New York Times. She was working on something today. Lawyer, bridge builder, freedom fighter, and friend. Reverend Traci Blackmon, an old friend of our reverends here, is on the AU Board of Trustees, former Associate General Minister of Justice and Local Church Ministries for the United Church of Christ. We lobbied together with Rachel at the Summit for Religious Freedom. Salam al-Mariyati is the president and co-founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, born in Iraq. He is an expert on Islam in the West, Muslim reform movements, human rights, democracy, national security, and Middle East politics. Rabbi Susan Goldberg, an old friend, a technical consultant on a show called Transparent. Fourth generation Angelino, founder of Nefesh, a progressive spiritual community on LA's east side, and a national board member for Bend the Arc, a Jewish partnership for justice. Eddie Tabash, Esquire, is another AU board member. He is a constitutional lawyer, an expert in church-state separation, a tireless advocate for atheists and for working to end the stigma attached to not believing, and of course our own Reverend Mike, the rector here. I want to hear from everybody about this. This is obviously a terrifying time where there is an unapologetic attack on the separation of church and state. And let me begin with you, Rachel.
Thank you. I think it's on. Hello, hello. Okay.
Got it.
Hi. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to everyone online. There's a lot of you from all around the country, so we're all in good company. Thank you so much to Bradley Whitford and Amy Landecker for diving in to this issue. I just said a little bit earlier to them, if only everyone's household talked about this as often as you all did, and that's part of what we're trying to do. Because the question is, why are we all here? And the answer tonight is we're here because white Christian nationalism is a danger to each and every one of us. And the only way we can defeat it is if we come together like we are tonight, and if we come together across differences. So first, let me explain. All right, thank you. Let me explain what white Christian nationalism is. It's a cultural construct and a political ideology rooted in the belief that America was created for European Christians and that our laws and policies should reflect that privilege today. It is surging around the country. You may have read in the past couple of days about how our Supreme Court Justice Alito had something called the Appeal to Heaven flag flying outside of his vacation home. The Appeal to Heaven flag, which is a white background with a green pine tree and the words Appeal to Heaven, is the symbolic flag of the Christian nationalist movement right now, right? So the idea of the movement that it's associated with is for ultra-conservative Christians to take over the 7 sectors of society, and one of those is government. And they are making very serious strides, right? Not just with a Supreme Court justice, and we know that there are others who are sympathizers as well, but also it turns out that the Speaker of the People's House, Mike Johnson, also flies the Appeal to Heaven flag outside of his congressional office, right? And at the same time, we're witnessing the overruling of Roe v. Wade and the imposing of one narrow religious viewpoint on people in 20 states right now across our country. Vicious attacks rooted in religious extremism on the LGBTQ community. Vicious attacks on public schools where the majority of our children go and learn how to live across our differences in our beautiful pluralistic society. Attacks on religious minorities, attacks on the non-religious, right? And really attacks on our democracy, because white Christian nationalists ripped off their masks at the insurrection on January 6th. They paraded with crosses, with Jesus Saves flags, and with the Appeal to Heaven flag, the one that's was reported to have flown outside of the vacation home of Supreme Justice Alito, right? So the threat is incredibly real right now, but it's happening because we've been winning. It's happening because we are at a place in this country where we've been making progress of late towards our promise of freedom and equality for all, because marriage equality has been the law of the land, because we had our first black president, our first black and female vice president serving right now, because of the Me Too movement, right? Because of the gains in recent years. That's what it's a backlash against. And the cure is really simple, but not enough people get it. The cure is to separate religion and government. Because if their goal, which is incompatible with democracy and equality, is to impose their narrow religious views on all of us, right? Then if we stop religion from being imposed into the law, we stop white Christian nationalism in its tracks, right? And here's the other reason why we're all here tonight. Because we all need to feel that we're in the majority. We are. We are the people of this country who believe in equality, who know that we're protected by the commitment and promises of equality. And we've got to remember that and act in order to save our country right now and to save all the freedoms that sit on that wall of separation between church and state. So I'm so happy we're here. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Eddie, I'll get to you in 1 second. It just brings up something I heard sitting in the pews here in this church that I think about a lot. That I think that the voices of exclusion and repression understand a little more than the majority of us do, who tend to believe in the inevitability of decency, in the inevitability of democracy. And what I heard in this church was, from a spiritual leader, was politics is the way you create your moral vision. And I think about this in my life because I think we tend to think it's culture. West Wing won't help you if you have a pre-existing condition. And Handmaid's Tale is a huge hit, but it won't help you if you're a rape victim in Ohio. And I think the right has understood that better, and that's why they have been so effective, even though they are in the minority, of weaponizing the political system based on an absurd lie about our founding myth. Anyway, take it from there, Eddie.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this evening. In America today, we are on the threshold of two possible futures. One future is one in which we will continue our progress toward being a modern secular society. The other is one in which we will regress into a medieval-style religious tyranny. Why are we under siege like this when we have made so many gains and so much progress in the past few decades? It is because in the past few years, we have lost the Supreme Court. There are now 6 religious right-wing justices out of 9 who are dedicated to rolling back the separation of church and state and singling out people who don't agree with their religion for actual second-class citizenship. And most of all, they believe that all branches of government can favor religion over people like me, atheists and other non-believers. And I need to say that we atheists, though we are under attack like never before from all branches of government because of the court, never wanted or want greater rights than anyone else. All we've ever asked for are equal rights. But when justices like Thomas and Alito and Gorsuch say that government can favor religion over irreligion, it scares us. And I can tell you, as the son of an Auschwitz surviving mother, when I hear about people wanting to empower government to take away a whole group's freedom just because of who they are, I get quite frightened. And I promise you, as an atheist, we will never try to come into this church on Sunday and forcibly yank you all out to worship the hydrogen atom. We're not imposing anything on anyone, but we want equal rights before the law. Now, this is what we've got to do to restore what we once had and to get further along. We have to view each presidential election and each election to the United States Senate as a referendum on the Supreme Court and other federal courts, because the president appoints and the Senate can accept or reject a federal judicial nominee. We have to start electing church-state separation advocates to the state legislatures and start electing governors who will appoint state judges to the courts to uphold state constitutional provisions that would protect the separation of church and state. So it doesn't matter in some ways the gains we have made. It doesn't matter if in some portions of America more people are becoming tolerant. That legislation to impose religion on everyone, particularly in the destruction of abortion rights, is coming out of the woodwork every which way. And this is because the Supreme Court is upholding all of these laws. So even if they're a minority, they can seize control of the police power of the state. And so we have to address the political process and the legal process to try to stop the bleeding and to try to move back to our trajectory toward equal rights for everyone. To me, this is the most important battle we can join, and which future we have may very well depend on the work we do in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eddie. And I think part of what Eddie is saying is that we don't have any freedom to practice. It's not just about atheism. We don't have the freedom to practice any religion if we don't have separation of church and state, which was clearly intended. The polling, by the way, of people who think that we are fundamentally founded on Christian principles is terrifying, because we have been silent about it while they have been pushing, what do you call it, a big lie. Salam?
Thank you. I want to start by saying that I think all of religious nationalism is an evil, whether we're talking about Islam, Christianity, or Judaism, because religious nationalism is actually anti-religion. When you take religion and distort it, and you tether it with ethno-nationalism, immediately you deviate from religious principles. And when you look at religion in any society, the biggest threat to religion is actually religious nationalism. The Quran says, for those who want to believe, let them believe. For those who don't want to believe, let them not believe. So right there, in the words of God, according to Muslims, God is saying that there should be a separation between power and religion. You should not use power to impose religious ideology on people. Therefore, religion is the property of the people. It is not the property of the state. Once it becomes the property of the state, then it loses its characteristics as a religion. And so the principles that God wants us to follow, which is mercy, compassion, and justice, they are the furthest things away from religious nationalism. Religious nationalism is actually anti-mercy, anti-compassion, and anti-justice. And therefore, religious nationalism is anti-God. So, in our society, I believe that secularism is the biggest friend to religion. Secularism defined in the American way, not being anti-religion, but being neutral on religion. And that is exactly why we have the First Amendment, that Congress is to make no law that abridges the right of religious freedom for anyone. No law that violates the freedom of speech. And the freedom of speech is not granted to us by government, it is granted to us by our Creator. It is granted to us by humanity. And therefore it is the responsibility of not only government, but of religious societies to defend the freedom of speech, the freedom to choose which allows people, therefore, the freedom of religion. And that is why I believe secularism is the friend of religion, and religious nationalism is the arch enemy of religion.
Susan?
I've been thinking a lot about fear in all of this. The deeper you go into Christian nationalism and white supremacy, which, by the way, the lines are very blurred around Christian nationalism and white supremacy. Sometimes not blurred at all when organizations come together, but it's very connected. And I know for myself that I feel tremendous fear the more I learn about the details of what's happening. Not what might happen, but what is happening. And it's, the move towards a theocracy, if we look at states like Oklahoma and other states, and there's that sort of playbook in which they're cutting and pasting laws for the legislature that are happening now all over the country that deal with gender and sexuality and race and economics and education and libraries and on and on and on. And it can be extremely overwhelming and scary. And so I just want to name that fear is very present in this, and that it's something we need to see and call out. Because fear is also what's being manipulated in the other part of this, in the Christian nationalism and white supremacy movements. The backlash to multiculturalism and to a growing secular society, and that sense of feeling persecuted and under attack. Professor Peter Dreyer is here. He has a piece recently in The Nation that speaks to this idea of white Christian nationalists feeling personally persecuted. And so they then have to protect themselves as white people. They feel like white people are under attack, Christians are under attack. And that sense of fear is very much driving them to being very involved in everything from local library boards and school boards to state legislatures and on and on. So yes, it's a small group, and it's getting smaller all the time. However, it's a very active group, a very active group. And Margaret Mead has that, who was a colleague of my grandparents, has that quote, I'm gonna get it wrong, but she said something like, never doubt that a small group of concerned citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And we see that and we say, yeah, amen, that's right. But that's also true for others. And right now, they are very activated. And they're activated from a place of fear. And I want to put out to us that we need to get activated. Because they may be in smaller numbers, but they are outsizing their numbers when it comes to voting. They are outsizing their numbers when it comes to local politics and participation. So they may be a small group, but small groups are what change the future of the country. And so I want to invite us to think about how more active we can be, and not be in that reactive place, a place of fear, but a place of our vision of what we want to see and the future we want to build. Because we need to be just as motivated at that as they are in trying to roll back things that have scared them. And in that place of fear, I also want to say that it's not impossible to talk to people who have a very different idea of this country than you do. And that's part of what's happened to us. We've lost our ability to talk to each other. I would say probably all of us can think about somebody, maybe an uncle or something, who he talks around the kitchen, the table of, oi, that racism, oi, that misogyny. That is exactly the uncle we need to be talking to. And that's not some imagined thing. That's a conversation that all of us can have or can go seek to have. Because that is one of the only ways we're going to get there. We need to do serious work with people who agree with us, and we have to do serious work with people who disagree with us. And we need to not be afraid of any of those conversations, because it turns out that we can survive having difficult conversations. I know there's some idea that we can't, but we can. We can survive difficult conversations, and it's part of our sacred calling right now to be doing that all the time and often. And I want to say a piece about, as a Jewish person, because there has been a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism, and I want to just call out that began in 2016. That began with the campaign in 2016. I mean, not that anti-Semitism was ever gone, but that was the rise. And so when people recently are asking me, oh, do you see a rise of anti-Semitism right now? Absolutely we do. But we just want to remember that it came to force some years ago with the Great Replacement Theory and knowing what they were chanting in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, and how connected that is to a racist narrative in the United States, the way that anti-Semitism and racism are used by white supremacists. And that now there is a very strange phenomenon happening where the same politicians who've talked about the Great Replacement Theory, talked about very anti-Semitic things, are now somehow the champion of Jewish people. In Congress, just today, we saw them interviewing the heads of the colleges. It's like, wait a second, let's go back into your past and think about what you have said about Jewish people. I mean, if you want to fundamentally change, amen, let's see it. But don't be using it as a manipulation. Don't be using the Jewish community as a manipulation in order to try to move an agenda that is definitely not in the interests of Jewish people or of any people.
Yeah, one thing I've been reading about is the phrase you'll hear the most right-wing Christian nationalists use the phrase Judeo-Christian values. Well, Judeo-Christian values was a term that the Christian nationalists came up to soften Christian values in the wake of the Holocaust, but it is a pander toward a kind of inclusion, which of course does not include everybody. And what you were saying about fear and despair, you know, movements like this depend on our exhaustion, depends on our becoming hypnotized by the complexity of how to answer it. And we have to remember that despair is not a luxury that the future can afford, and that action is the antidote to despair. And we need to be inspired to participate in this, terrifying moment. Anyway, Traci.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say a couple of things because I'm eager to get into this conversation. I am so honored to be here at All Saints, a place where I know that your faith is 2,000 years old, but your thinking is not. And I'm grateful for that. And I also am incredibly honored to be on this panel with everyone that is here, because what I think is most needed right now in the US are progressive voices, differing voices, that are not afraid to be together and to dialogue and to have conversation, to understand that unity does not require uniformity, and that we may disagree even on this panel, but we are united against the enemy that we face. We have to get there as progressives. As progressives, we tend to want to love everybody, agree with everybody, and until we fix these differences, we can't go anywhere. Well, time's up. We have to figure out how to be unified even when we're not uniform. I also want to echo what I heard Salam say, if that's okay, if I call you that, that religious nationalism is a global issue. And we are seeing the convergence of religious nationalism happening everywhere. But as one of the Christians on this panel, I must acknowledge that we have to start this fight at home. And white Christian nationalism is what we are facing. We have done some of the most egregious acts against humanity. have happened under the name of Christianity. And it didn't just start in 2016. It didn't even just start in the 2000s. All the way back to the doctrine of discovery, we are culpable for where we are now. And we have been far too silent all along this journey. So let me be clear that for me, when I talk about white Christian nationalism, I am talking about a particular God that is being elevated. A God that is white, a God that is relatively wealthy, a God that is male, a God that is straight. And while I am a Christian, that ain't my God. So I want us to encourage us to not abdicate any more of our language about what it means to be people of faith because of what we face. We have to name what we are facing and confront it courageously. What is happening in this nation is a danger to both the church and the state. Anytime we marry those two things, no one wins. And while it may be tolerable, even for some of us, to consider a nation where Christian values are lifted above everything else, please understand that when you create a government based on religion, you are not guaranteed that it's always going to be your religion. So we lose even in a moment where we might feel more comfortable. I don't believe that it is a good thing to have a Bible selling for $59.99 with an American flag etched on it. Nor is it a good thing to have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights included in our religious document. The Bible is not meant to be a governing force in our politics. It is not. And when we begin to legislate faith, we automatically eliminate some of the people who we are actually called to serve. In Missouri, my home state, the legislation of faith has led to a complete abortion ban. Under no circumstances are you able to get an abortion in the state of Missouri. The legislation of faith in Missouri has forced my good friend, Maharat Lori Picker niece, who is an Orthodox rabbi, to have to relocate her entire family so that her trans child can get the medications that he needs. In the state of Missouri, people are losing their jobs because they stand for racial equity and racial justice. Books are banned. History is banned because there is no history without everyone's history. In the state of Missouri, our legislators are bold enough to say that they are voting the way they are voting because of their faith. Now, if we weren't here for this, I would love to challenge what that faith really says. Because the work I think that those of us who identify as Christian have to do is largely rooted in uprooting a malformed theology that suggests that God is divided against God's self and loves some of God's creation more than God loves others in God's creation. That is not the Bible. So I amen everything that has been said so far, and I'm going to be quiet because I think the dialogue is rich that we can have here tonight.
Thank you. Mike?
I just want to wait just a minute. I want to let Traci's words sink in for a second. Thank you. There's so much that's resonated with me that I don't want to take the time to repeat, and so I'll try to be brief. And I see those of you who are my parishioners rolling your eyes already. There are multiple threats, and I want to speak briefly about two of them. And the first one is sort of obvious. The pressing one that has brought us here together tonight is the threat of what we've rightly called white, I would add the word extremist, Christian nationalism. I've gotten to the point where I actually don't refer to myself as a Christian anymore because the way that that term is used, the automatic assumption is about a religion I don't recognize. Part of what we talk about here at All Saints is that we're followers of the revolutionary Jesus. And that's language that I prefer because there is a specific and deep distortion that we've talked about here of the life and teachings of Jesus, that instead of the values of the Beatitudes, the Magnificat, of universal love, instead it is a version of Christianity that enshrines the doctrines of white supremacy and racial capitalism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, Islamophobia, and as you so eloquently said, Rabbi Susan, anti-Semitism, because it only embraces Judaism in a way that holds on to an incredibly distorted and harmful view of Judaism as being something that is necessary for something in this distorted Christianity to happen, and that ain't Judaism. And it aims making all of those things even more than they already are, not just a belief system, but the law of the land, enforceable. And we have seen this happen with the lethal power of the U.S. government and its agents at the national, state, and local level. And so we've seen how this plays out. Commander Lawrence, I think you would agree with us on this. And there's another threat, and you touched on this just now, Traci, but it actually goes back even further than what you're talking about. And it's one that right now our focus is rightly on stopping the rise and reversing the rise of this kind of white extremist Christian nationalism. And what I have to remind myself is that this is nothing new, and it actually goes back further than the doctrine of discovery. It goes back to the year 312. Anyone in here know what happened in the year 312? Shout it out. Constantine. Constantine, in the year 312, converted to Christianity, and I do not believe because his heart was strangely warmed. Never met the man, but I don't know. He did it because he saw the power in a movement that could be used to buttress the power of empire. And he did that, and ever since, that has co-opted what has become Christianity. As Christianity was spread around the globe, it was used as an agent of oppression and control and destruction of local culture and local faith. And it is that perversion of the teachings of Jesus that in various forms, even though you are absolutely right, the founders of this country were very clear that this is not a Christian nation, but those values, particularly white supremacy and racial capitalism, were brought to this country. And even though there was wisdom in our founders, and our founding documents are aspirational in beautiful ways, and we need to continue to aspire to them, that when and we're going to do it, because we're going to work hard to do it, and we're going to come together to do it. When we stop the spread and reverse the spread of white extremist so-called Christian nationalism, we're going to need to remember that there is still so much work to do, because those values that started with Constantine and a particular interpretation and misinterpretation of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ are in the DNA of this country. And yet we have a growing sense, and that's what this backlash is about. We have a growing sense that we are better than that. We have a growing sense that that kind of power and control and domination does not enrich us or make us safer. It impoverishes us. It limits us. It makes us not joyful, but joyless. And the systems that we have in place, even before 2016, were deadly and toxic, and they still are. Traci, you and I spent so much time together in St. Louis, and people are always telling me things that I said that I don't remember I said. So I'm going to tell you something that you said years ago, and you may not remember that you said, but Traci was on the Ferguson Commission. And you ever want to Google something amazing? There's an amazing scholar named Amy Hunter. And Google Amy Hunter and lucky zip codes. And you'll see a TEDx talk that Amy Hunter gave. And basically what you find out is there's a street in St. Louis called Del Mar, and above it is vast majority black, and below it is vast majority white. And there is a huge difference, not just economically, but in life expectancy, depending on what zip code you were born in and what zip code you live in. And what you said talking about that was, kill me quickly or kill me slowly, I'm still dead. And for this whole nation's history, we have been doing both, either implicitly or explicitly, in the name of Jesus. So we're gathering here tonight, rightly, to halt the extremism that is threatening our democracy. And it is important to remember that many of us, myself included, and All Saints Church, more resemble the white moderates that Dr. King lamented in a letter from the Birmingham jail. We more resemble that than we represent the true teachings of Jesus. That's not to shame us. That's to remind us that we all have such amazing, joyful work of liberation ahead of us. It is not just stopping this spread of white extremist Christian nationalism that is toxic to all of us. It is saying that we need to do that so we can continue in this amazing work of liberation from the toxic theology that needs to be excised from our DNA, so that all of us can enjoy the gift of life no matter what we believe or how we live. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to open it up. I guess, Rachel, you can start with this. I'm just thinking about what we appear to be in what feels like kind of an emergency that is probably, I don't know. I'm just wondering what each of you, Rachel, you can begin. What is the most effective way to combat this in the long term and in the short term? I feel like the right, it's an amazing Orwellian trick, the inversion of what I see as the values of Jesus, the inversion of what I see the pragmatic choices that the founders were making in terms of this question, and breaking away from a place where the church, that the fundamental impulse was breaking away from a place where the political and the religious were merged. I feel like there's a lot of work to do to undo that founding myth. I think we need to call out politicians who are inverting religious values and using their self-proclaimed identity as Christians or Muslims or Jews. But I'm wondering what do you feel is the most pragmatic way going forward? And I'm wondering about you people who preach to people, what kind of pickle are you in when you're talking about pragmatic issues that can blend into the political, because it seems like the political arena is where we're all kind of losing our freedom right about now.
So pragmatically, one of the things that we can do is get celebrities to help us.
Aim
it's
higher.
true. Can I have an amen to that? I mean, that's really important. Thank you. It's so important for our cause. But I was just getting my notes because you've talked about despair, already. And one of the things that I notice, because I call our members regularly, is how hopeless so many people feel right now. It's really remarkable. And it's shared by older people and younger people, because a lot of older people have never even lived through what's going on in the country right now. So I think first and foremost, we have to find hope, because without hope, we can't act. We stay home, which is exactly what they want us to do. And I just was going to read this beautiful quote, which I love, by Howard Zinn, who wrote like the real history of the United States. He said, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness, and that we have to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us. That's a marvelous victory." So I think, number one, find your hope and help give others hope, right? Because like I said initially, the reason we're in this situation right now is because a real minority in this country, we've talked about them having outsized power, are raging against the dying of their privilege, right? And so we have the power of the people big time, right? So let's remember that. And number two, then let's be loud and proud again about this abstract thing that we call church-state separation that in fact affects our daily lives. I mean, I think, Reverend Blackmon, I think Traci laid out such a scary picture of what it looks like in real time right now in Missouri, right, to have lost so much of church-state separation. So we need to talk about it again. We can't take it for granted anymore. It's not just something that was embedded in our Constitution in the late 1700s, although it was that too, right? And remember, we have the Constitution on our side. We have the power of the people on our side, right? So let's not forget that. Let's talk about church-state separation again. And three, we could use a little more support at Americans United, au.org. What we're doing is every day bringing together this kind of community. And it feels so good, doesn't it? It feels good to be part of such a diverse community and to be coming together across our divides in such a divided moment. I know as a Jew today, every time I share the stage with a Muslim, I feel grateful, And so, we're bringing religious and non-religious people together and fighting in the courts. Reverend Blackmon is actually the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit that Americans United brought with the National Women's Law Center, challenging Missouri's abortion ban as a violation of church-state separation. Thank you, Reverend Blackmon, for your courage. Thank you. And we're working with younger people, right? Because younger people are so much more active politically. I know Rev Traci's going to travel the country and make sure they get out and vote, which is so important. But we at Americans United are running a program that's countering what the Federalist Society has been doing for 40 years. It's called the Legal Academy. And we're actually bringing together law students from legal summer internships with the top impact litigation nonprofits, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, Center for Reproductive Rights, Lambda Legal, Americans United, all of our groups, 17 of us are sending our legal interns to learn from the best and the brightest of our generation. This is happening. right? This is happening. How to fight back, what judicial philosophy should look like, what strategy looks like when the courts are bad, and how to network with power, with each other, and to sustain each other going forward. So we are the only secular group that is devoted 24/7 to fighting for church-state separation, and we are fighting $1 billion shadow network. We need more support, and we'd really appreciate you joining us and telling your friends about us too.
And yes, amen. One of the important things that AU does is highlight these state issues, which is a place where I know from my own home state in Wisconsin, I have seen how white Christian nationalism basically, because, I don't know, people who share my political point of view are kind of too cool for school to care about the nitty-gritty of local and state politics, and that's where a lot of this stuff came from. It's where it was incubated with the help of Karl Rove and the Federalist Society. I mean, we Leonard Leo. There's a wonderful podcast. You should. What is it? We Don't Talk About Leonard. Basically weaponized, the attorney generals in any number of states, while the people who I think care about freedom were looking away. Anyway, AU is a wonderful place that is fighting those battles and putting out those fires before they take off. So, Eddie, thoughts?
Yes. If you'll pardon the pun, the devil is always in the details. The reason why we're in the situation we are is because Trump was able to put 3 people on the Supreme Court to create a 6-3 majority on that court, and the Constitution means only what a majority of justices say it means at any given moment in time. Now, for me as an atheist who wants everyone to be equal, I was frightened 5 years ago when in the spring of 2019 at Pepperdine Law School, Clarence Thomas openly questioned why we atheists take oaths in the first place since we don't believe in a supernatural enforcer, strongly indicating that he might even uphold going back to the barbaric laws of 200 years ago where atheists were not permitted to testify in court. So what I would like to ask Justice Thomas is, if you are the kind of Christian that you are and you're saved, you wouldn't lose your salvation just because you committed perjury. So what is your incentive? And if you are an observant Catholic like Justice Thomas is, and you lie under oath, you just go to confession. But nobody brought that up, and nobody even batted an eyelash. So what we have to do immediately is we have to treat every U.S. Senate and every presidential election as a referendum on the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts, because if the United States Supreme Court remains dominated by religious right-wing oppressors, we will never get these liberties back, and it will only get worse. After that, we have to get our people into the state legislatures, because now that the court is throwing everything back to the states, the state legislatures will become crucial. So these are the actions we have to undertake. But I also want to give everybody, you don't have to adopt this, but I've sort of had my own kind of working definition of separation of church and state. And what it really means is no one in the United States should ever lose their freedom to do what they want to do because of nothing more than someone else's religious views. And I think if we look at it that way, we can see exactly how tremendous the danger is and we can't be afraid to engage the legal and political battles necessary to take back our country and to move forward to equality for everybody.
So since we're talking about church and state, I'll use an example on church or mosque or synagogue for that matter, any house of worship, and an example for the state. For the house of worship, I think the number one issue facing all of us as people of faith is the problem of racism. In Islam, the Quran refers to Satan as the first racist. Satan says, I'm better than human beings because I'm made out of fire. Human beings are made out of clay. And so that is the first lesson for us to say that we should never have any notion that we are better because of the color of our skin or ethnic background or our tribe. And so when we look at the messengers that came and gave us revelation, provided revelation and wisdom, they were all trying to break down the system of tribalism. And what we found, however, is that once religion became powerful, its leaders resorted back to tribalism. That happened in Islam. Obviously, it's happening in Christianity. And in some cases, it's happening in Judaism. And in each and every case, the idea of a religious state is a failure. The idea of an Islamic state is a failure. The idea of political Zionism is failing. The idea of Christian nationalism and creating a Christian state is failing simply because they are all tied to a form of ethno-nationalism. And we have to rid ourselves from any kind of racism starting within our houses of worship in order to practice our religion the way it was meant to be, and that is to do away with any sense of ethno-nationalism and tribalism and racism. And that's something that we have to work on every day. We fast as Muslims, even though I don't like it, for 30 days for that purpose, to get rid of the oppressor within my heart so I am capable of fighting oppression in society. To pray, to connect to God 5 times a day, to give alms as a sense of purifying the soul. So racism, I think, is the one issue that we have to fight and combat as people of faith. Number 2 on the state is war. And racism is used to foment war. That is the way to dehumanize people. To this day, I don't think Americans have any sense of what happened in Iraq. There are studies now that show that 500 to 800,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 were killed during and between the 2 Gulf Wars, according to a study from Brown University. I don't think many Americans are aware of that fact. And to date, in Gaza, 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, and the only group that is expressing any conscience in our society are the students who are being punished for saying that this is wrong and they don't want to have anything to do with it. 15,000 children killed so far. War kills children. And going back to religion, when Abraham was ready to sacrifice his son, God said, no, don't sacrifice the child. We will do away with this tradition of child sacrifice. Go and do something else and feed what you sacrifice for people to help the poor. We are going back to child sacrifice through war, through dehumanization. And as there's a famous quote, I forgot who said it. He said, the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 1 million people is a statistic. And that is what we're looking at, is statistics, when we see what's happening in war. And from that war, what happens, obviously, is that there's a repression against our civil liberties when we speak out against it. There's a violation of our First Amendment when we speak out against it. And so this is the test of the First Amendment right now. to honor it, to cherish it, to protect it, to bring it back to life. Otherwise, these words that we read in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are great words that are found in our archives in Washington, D.C., about freedom and liberty. We came to liberate, not to conquer, in the World War II memorial, and so on and so forth. These words are now hollow, and they're only seen in the halls of museums. They should be lived in the halls of power. And that means that we have to fight against war to fight against religious nationalism, because obviously religious nationalism is the main vehicle for fomenting more war. And the last thing, to Peter Dreyer's wonderful article in The Nation, where he says that Christian nationalists, evangelicals, represent the most racist group in America. And it's true. And some of the most extreme of them go to the extent that they go in Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue, and they kill Jews because they think that Jews are financing Muslims to come through the southern border to kill white Christians. And they play that great replacement conspiracy over and over again. And it is attack against immigrants. And it started in France, actually, against Algerian and Moroccan, North African immigrants in France. That great replacement, that they're going to go and replace them. My response to them is, stop bombing the countries, stop going to war with those countries, and they wouldn't have to come to your country. And there would be equity in the way we allocate and we use our natural resources throughout the world, not stealing oil, not stealing the riches of other countries, and then we wonder why people flee those countries as a result of economic despair. So, the national security state, which, they keep saying we have to do this for national security. We go to war in Iraq for national security. We intern Japanese Americans for national security. We, the people, have to now stand up and say that national security policy is hollow. It's not serving your security or our security, anyone's security. It is making us more insecure. So combating war and fighting this national security apparatus that the powerful want to unleash on the powerless, I think, is one of the most important actions that we can take.
I want to tell you that I found what you just said very healing. In the Jewish tradition, we call it having a tikkun, a healing. And I feel very moved at the moment because I think of the centuries of what was done in the name of Christianity to the Jewish people. And I don't think I've ever heard a Christian articulate in the way that you just did. So I feel very moved. And I also feel aware that one of the things you said was that you don't identify as a Christian anymore because of the assumptions that come with it.
I try not to use that word.
That word. But I also feel like I really want you to. Because I feel like there's also a real pressure for us to seed what our religions are to the fundamentalists and the nationalists and what's happening now with Christian nationalism in the United States. Because, Mike, I want Christians I want it to be the Christianity you're naming. I want it to be the Christianity you're naming. And you all are the majority. It's a Christian hegemony we're living in here. So the power of your claiming what Christianity is will have incredible repercussions for all of us. And recently, we are, the Jewish, the Episcopals really show up for the Jewish people in Los Angeles. I just want to say that out loud to everybody. In many ways, the Episcopals have really shown up for Jews. I have many examples of it. And I grew up in Echo Park. There was no temple there at the time. And I was very moved by Father Bruno, who then became Bishop Bruno, and was a big part of my call towards being a faith leader. And now we're housed at the Episcopal Diocese, Nefesh is, in Echo Park. There was no community in Echo Park, Silver Lake when I was growing up, and now there is, because we have started this community. But one day, we were cleaning up after services, and our community has a lot of queer and trans folks are in our community. And somebody saw something on the ground, and they picked it up, and what it was the title said, a Christian perspective on queer and trans people, or LGBTQ people. And already, that was just the title, and people were like, oh, I don't know if we should read this. Like, I don't know if we need to be like traumatized by what we're about to read. However, we did read it, and when it was one of the most moving things that we had ever seen. I mean, in terms of what we've heard about Christianity. And for the queer and trans folks, everybody gathered in a circle and read the theology that was stated there. That didn't move away from Bible or theology, but went deep inside of it to come to the place of not acceptance or tolerance, but profound divinity. And amen to separation of church and state. That's clearly what we know how much we need that. But to also not cede what our religions are to people who are changing them and claiming a narrative that is about harm, and instead claiming a narrative that is about love and courage and justice and the world we want to live in. And to do that loudly and very proudly, often and all the time. And I already skipped at the beginning to what we can do, because it's in a very Jewish way. We go from the problem to what we can do very fast. So I'll just remind everyone that there is something that each of us can do and need to do. As you know, I'm sure many of you are doing it, but here's blessings on your continued doing this in terms of building the society that we all know we can and need to have. And you've referred a couple times to how important it is to have celebrity. That's what he can do. And that each of us has a unique calling of what we can do. Maybe it's in the realm of giving. Maybe it's in the realm of, you're a librarian. Amen for librarians. What an important moment to be a librarian. It's like a tremendous calling right now. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe you're an organizer. In fact, we need to all be organizers wherever we are. And to just be clear about what it is that you can individually do, and then nothing changes individually. Who are you called to then be in community with so we can affect great change?
I told you it would be rich. Susan, you said something that I was going to say. Mike and I are good friends, and I respect your choice, but I'm not going to give up being a Christian. And both are okay, right? But I do want to clarify that I identify as a Christian because I follow the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus is an Afro-Semitic, Palestinian Jewish rabbi. And in the being of the one I follow, I am commanded to make space for everyone, not just those that are like me. So I want to go quickly to what I think we can do. I first want to talk about what we can do from our spaces, and that is to be authentically ourselves, and to admit that in each one of us, there is always the capacity to do good and to do evil. I work very hard not to demonize people, not even those that I don't particularly like. I have to see humanity in everyone. And that's not always easy. But what helps me is to remember every morning that I have the capacity within myself to do good and to do evil, and to choose every day what I will do. It is important because we need to be able to see and hear one another. And we cannot do that if we dehumanize anyone. That's very important to me. Secondly, we have to have courageousness even when we're not in crowds. And we have to interrupt theologies, opinions, conversations that we know are harmful to this society. We have to have the courage to do that, not just in places like this, but in the most dangerous places, which are around our dinner tables and in our inner circles, and with people who we know have got it wrong, but we just can't bring ourselves to say it to them. I also want to say that for Christians in the room, we have to begin to examine our theologies and to preach a theology that is inclusive of all of creation. We must deconstruct theologies of chosenness. We must do it. We must understand that the Bible is a sacred text that a people wrote about their relationship with God. It is not a book that God wrote. Lastly, I want to say, outside of what we must do internally in ourselves, is that I just don't believe that we can be sustained only on what we are against. What are we for? What are we fighting for? What is the world that we might imagine if we took the indigenous practice of thinking 7 generations ahead of us? What do we imagine the world should look like? And can we set that on a horizon of hope so that we are not only creating defense mechanisms, but we have offensive tactics? Because the victories of staving off evil will not sustain us. We must have something that we're hoping for. Might we dream together, not of individual policies, but of a world that we want our children and our children's children and our children's children to have. I pray that we have hope and a plan for that hope, and that we don't spend all of our time, we might disagree about this, but I cannot live simply fighting what I'm against. I have to be able to see what I'm reaching for. I'm hoping that we will do that. One last thing, because I'm a preacher and we have like 4 last things. One last thing. Okay, 2 last things. But they go together, they go together. One is, We must have the courage to vote principles over parties. Just let it sit, you'll get there. We must vote our principles over parties. And that means that we must do our work, not just for who sits in the White House, but who sits in the schoolhouse, who sits in the State House. Principles over party. And the last thing is, every election is not about victory. Quite frankly, most elections are not. If I can be candid, I'm not in love with either one of these candidates. But I am in love with the hope of democracy. So voting is a strategy. It's a strategy. And I hope as you're talking to young people and older people who have decided to sit this out, let them know that sitting it out is bad strategy for democracy. I'll stop there.
Well, I'll just pick up what you put down there. So practical things, several. The first is 5 words, and I'm asking this as a real question. Raise your hands. Are you registered to vote? Okay, looks like everyone in this room is. Say those 5 words. Are you registered to vote? Say that again. Okay, those words need to be on our lips at all times. If you are in conversation with anyone of voting age, somewhere in your conversation, ask that question and be prepared if the answer is no, to quote Traci, and to give them instructions of how they do that. The great thing about democracy is if we all exercise the franchise and we remove the barriers to everyone exercising the franchise, democracy actually will continue to win. So that's the first thing we can do. Second thing, Eddie, I love what you said about the Supreme Court. I absolutely agree with that. That is incredibly important. And also, Bradley, what you said about, and you said about the schoolhouse and the State House, it's also about the local courthouse. I don't know about you, when I look at my ballot, my sample ballot here, and those names of judges are there, I don't know who most of them are. That's right. And it's really hard to find information about who they are, and yet the information is out there. The vast, vast majority of legal decisions never make it to the Supreme Court or anywhere close. They happen on the local level. And so we have to educate ourselves about judicial candidates, because that's how things like Christian nationalism sneak into the judicial system. It's not just when a president appoints a Supreme Court justice, it's when we unwittingly elect people who don't believe in the separation of church and state. And we put them on the bench because we don't know. I always encourage people, not that these are the only people who can mete out justice, but because they're incredibly underrepresented on the bench, look for public defenders who are running for judges. Because I have yet to meet a Christian nationalist public defender. I'm sure they're out there somewhere. But the public defenders I know, they care about their clients, and hopefully all lawyers do. But just educate ourselves about the judges. And if you want it, like Pasadena has more nonprofits per capita than any city in California. We don't need more nonprofits in Pasadena. But if you want to take on as a project, educating the public about judicial candidates, please do that. Please do that. Third thing, Brian Stevenson, who I hope you know, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. Yeah. Brian Stevenson reminds us that the key to any change for justice is what he calls proximity. And it gets to what you were talking about I refuse to demonize people. we are becoming more and more resegregated as a society. And yes, that's true in racial terms. It's also true in theological terms. It's true in political terms. We only, I think probably gathered in this room and online, we probably agree with each other on many, many things, much more than we disagree. And there's folks out there, so many of them, whom we disagree with. Tom Petty had a beautiful song, I love Tom Petty, called Southern Accents. And the first line of it was, there's a Southern accent where I come from. The young'uns call it country, the Yankees call it dumb. We who are coastal elites in this country, we who are progressives and love Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart, we have succeeded through our rhetoric in making a large portion of this population feel less than and feel dumb by the way that we make fun of them. And it's that we, them that we've got to destroy. If you have family members, if you have friends, if you have acquaintances who are leaning towards Christian nationalism or voting in a way that will take away rights, we don't do any good by separating from each other. If it is safe for you, and this is where we need to make the distinction between safe, unsafe, and uncomfortable. I'm not asking you, if you are a transgender person, to go talk to someone who is transphobic. That's not safe. But for someone like me, some cisgender, white, wealthy, educated guy, there's not a lot of places. There's a lot of places I'm uncomfortable. There's very few I'm actually unsafe. And so it is up to me to seek out the people whom I differ from, people who might feel alienated by me, and say, I want to understand you. It's Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. Can we find, and just take one, each one find one. Is there one person that you can find who you already have a relationship with, who you're different from? And you can be curious about their life and how they got that way. Not every time, but in many ways, we vote, we act out of our wounds. And if we can meet in that place of vulnerability, then instead of acting in anger and rage out of wounds and trying to take away rights from other people and impose ours because it helps us feel a power that maybe in some other ways we feel like we're losing. And sometimes when we've had power our whole lives and someone else gets some, it feels like we're losing it. If we can do that, then we can get to the core issue, because if all we do is defeat the Christian nationalists, they're just going to rise again. That's what happens when we defeat people. Gandhi taught us this. If we just look at this as the enemy to be defeated, and we try to defeat the people, all we're doing is putting off the next time that they rise again. How can we, as we are able to build relationships across those divides, and it happens one person at a time. We struggle with this mightily here at All Saints Church, of trying to look each other in the eye among the differences even a progressive community has. We struggle mightily with it, but I gotta tell you, it's the work that's worth doing. Because what you end up with afterwards is more than just a convert. You end up with a friend. Thank you.
I think the staff's getting nervous because we have to wrap up. I think we have some questions. The only thing I want to add, yes, get people out to vote. If we've learned anything here, we don't just get a democracy. We don't just get a Christian faith. We don't just get a place where we can be an atheist. We have to fight for it every day. And if you are too cynical to participate in a democracy, you're sentencing yourself to a gulag that is dictated by those who do choose to participate, who tend to be a bunch of white nationalists, misogynists, homophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-atheist, business greedy. I was going to swear. So yeah, get out and vote. We have some questions.
Yeah, just keep talking.
Thanks, everybody. This has been such an amazing, fielding questions, hearing you answer them before I can even like finish reading them. So there was a cool flow here tonight. And unfortunately, we only have time for 2 questions. So I tried to smush a bunch together that had a common theme, and then we're going to end on hope. So the first kind of general question was leaning into what is happening in both local politics. Huntington Beach was referenced a few times, what's going on with the councils there, but then also what's going on in Louisiana, and I thought this was perfect, Rachel, to talk about the law that was just passed about putting the 10 Commandments in schools. How can we fight this? And I think we've all touched on this a little bit tonight, but are there any final words in how we can fight both at a local level with public libraries, book bans, but then also what's happening in states like Louisiana right now? So Rachel, I don't know if you want to start with that, and anyone else wants to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a lot of the same stuff that we've talked about, right? I mean, I think it's paying attention to local elections, right? We've forgotten to do that, like you were talking about earlier, and I think that's so important. I think it's remembering that we are in the majority, and I think it's tough. I mean, Oklahoma's about to open the first religious public charter school in the country, unless our lawsuit stops it. So that's on its way. Texas and Florida have passed laws that are allowing chaplains to replace certified school counselors in public schools. West Virginia almost passed a creationism law that would allow public school teachers to teach creationism in public schools. I mean, it is absolutely rough out there, but, and again, I'm not only blaming one set of religious folk, just per what we're saying, but I will also say that white evangelical Christians are 14% of the US population right now. And I think it's just important to remember. So I don't want to hog the floor, and I want to pass the baton. Just remember that voting is one of the most powerful ways you can express your authentic self. And I mean, I know we all know that, we've been talking about that a lot, but remind people, right? Because I get a little teary-eyed every time I vote. And when I used to when my kids were little and I used to bring them to vote, it was like really moving. And I think we've lost touch with that because we feel so powerless. So I think it's really important to remember that expression.
Yeah. And voting isn't a dating app, it's public transportation to get you closer to where you want to go.
I hope that all of you will not shoot the messenger, and I apologize for being the bearer of the most terrible news, and as the evening goes on, it gets worse and worse. But there's something else. There is a nuclear torpedo heading toward our freedoms, and very few people are aware of it. This doesn't even involve voting, but it involves contacting our state legislators in every state in the country. Steve Bannon, the arch-religious right-winger that Trump pardoned, started a movement a few years ago which is hurtling toward success and would destroy America as we know it. There is an attempt to call a new constitutional convention, the first since 1787, that would throw out the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights and rewrite everything. And they need 34 states, all the houses of legislatures in 34 states to call the convention, and only 4 more to ratify what they do at the convention. 19 states have already fully voted to hold this constitutional convention, and 1 house of 6 more states have voted to do this. This is under Article 5 of the Constitution. If a religious right-created constitutional convention, the first one since 1787, can revise the United States Constitution, this country as we know it disappears, and Salam and I are standing next to each other on the gallows.
Thank you.
I'll protect you. I'll protect you.
Together.
Okay, final question for the evening. West Wing tackled Christian nationalism decades ago, and we've been on a very slippery slope since before then. But please...
We really fixed political discourse, didn't we?
You nailed it, absolutely.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you all please leave us with a little bit of hope and maybe some action? What can folks do when they connect with AU? What resources does AU
Let me
have?
just say before, there is no more effective organization when you're hearing all of this terrifying information and worried about what to do. There is no more organized place, a more effective place than Americans United. AU.org, the celebrity said. So I really encourage you to do that because I know how overwhelming we need a delivery system, a political delivery system, and AU is that place. Go ahead.
Do you want a reverse order?
I would love to not follow Traci.
Okay, you go first. You go first. You go first.
That's Rachel's way of saying I want the last word.
I didn't even think of that.
Man.
And she gets it because she's over AU.
Okay, so really quick, two things in terms of resources. We have, if you're here in Pasadena or in the Los Angeles area, the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles is sponsoring a book study on Pamela Cooper White's The Psychology of Christian Nationalism, why people are drawn in and how to talk across the divide. There are flyers out at the table there. They have a QR code. Thank you, Susan Russell, for putting this together, our Canon for Communion Across Difference. This is, if you want to say, where do I learn more? Where do I have conversation about this? Do this. This is fantastic. And if you're watching with us online, it's Pamela Cooper White's The Psychology of Christian Nationalism. Don't go to Amazon. Go to your independent bookseller and get that and read that. The second thing I want to sort of launch off what you said about AU. I want everyone to pull out their phones, and if you're online, I want you to pull out your phone, or hopefully you're watching us on a computer. I'm serious. Pull out your phone right now and go to your browser. I don't see y'all doing this. I'm serious. Thank you. Go to your browser and hit au.org. I'm going to give you just a second. au.org. Now, the good thing about AU is it doesn't only stand for Americans United, it's also the symbol on the periodic table of elements for gold, which is what we need. We have 250 people in this room. We have more than 1,000 online. If the average gift here, I've just made a gift for $250 to AU. I also do a monthly gift. If the average gift in this room and online is $100, then we make more than $100,000 tonight for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I went and saw Madonna at the Forum, which was great, wonderful show. It was a dance party. It was fantastic. Our tickets were $450 a piece or something like that. That's how much that cost. It was a wonderful event, and it was not as important and as life-changing as the conversation that we have had and that hopefully you're going to continue to have when you leave this place. Those tickets were $400 a piece. I'm asking you for $100 if you can make it, more if you can. If you can do more, because there's others who can't do 100. But I want to challenge us out of this event tonight to raise $100,000 for Americans United for Church and State. And that's the difference of going to something and saying, oh yeah, that sounded good, that was interesting, and going back to our lives and being a part of a movement that is going to save our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did not have Madonna on the bingo card. Go ahead.
I don't want to follow you now. I'll give you a minute to finish that up. Thank you for that. Serving on AU's board is a privilege. and to see the hard work that is happening every freaking day. Every freaking day. Because of them, we were able to file a lawsuit against the state of Missouri, and I am the lead plaintiff, but let me be clear, there are 17 clergy that are on that lawsuit from multiple faiths, standing together, saying not in our state. So I want to give you two things for hope. One thing I want you to never forget, and one thing I want you to always remember. And yes, I know those are the same thing, okay? Never forget that this is not just about Trump. Let me say that again. Never forget this is not just about Trump. Trump would not have been able to do what he did if it was just about Trump. And if we don't fight for our democracy, we may not elect Trump, but our problems will not go away. The last thing of hope I want to offer you is the opportunity to turn to your neighbor. Turn to your neighbor. I'm Black, we do this for real. Turn to your neighbor.
We do this here at All Saints too.
Yay. And look them in the eye and say, I'm glad you're here with me.
I'm glad you're here with me.
You're here with me.
I know I'm not in this alone. And that, my friends, is hope.
Beautiful. Everything that has been said, I think it's been said many times over. I will say that when we talk about these things, they do feel big and overwhelming. And I want to lift up the principle of emergent strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown, who tells us that small is all. So please know that even if you're thinking, well, the thing that I can do is small, small is all. We need continuous small actions. So if that's going down to Huntington Beach, or if it's finding how you can be supportive of a neighbor who is in need, if it is about advocating for books, you know, as a Jewish person, we get the heebie-jeebies anytime, and we know it starts with the books. It's never a good person who wants to ban books. It's never a good agenda. Has anything ever come out of that that's good? I don't think so. So we need to, as my dear one who's a librarian wears her shirt, ban the bigots, not the books. So we, wherever that is for you, find your place, and then make sure you have 2, 3 people doing it with you. That's enough. 3 is a group. You could do a lot. You can find your place, what calls to you, and begin doing it, and then do it again tomorrow, and then do it the day after that, and then we do it. Because the thing also that we forget to celebrate enough is that we do this work because it's the right thing to do, but it also is so spiritually uplifting. It's where we find joy in service. Joy comes in service. And this is for everyone out there, and it's also for us. So the continuous daily actions are how we're going to get through this and build towards that society that we know is there and that we're moving towards.
For our community, it's a very challenging time because you have, as was stated before, 2 choices in general, even though there are more candidates for president. One person in our community is referred as Genocide Joe, and another person is quite simply a criminal who instigated a coup against our country, and yet he's running for president. But I always say that it's not about the horse race, it's about the constituency building. And so in each and every election, no matter who is president, we have to be prepared as a constituency to continue to advocate for the principles that will save lives. And we have to be ready to not only think about presidents and judges, but there are so many other local and congressional and state senate and state assembly positions. We need to find those social justice representatives and put them in office and put them up there, and they're the ones who will represent us, and they will push back against anything that's coming from the White House or the federal government or the bench or what have you. So there are so many positions that need to be filled in each and every election. Don't think about the horse race. Think about us as the constituency and how we're going to hold people accountable when they hold office. There's a gentleman here, a great leader in our eyes. He came to me and he said, you know, my church was bombed in Gaza. And I go, what? I didn't even know there was church in Gaza, and it was a Greek Orthodox church. And he's here, he ran for supervisor, he's running for re-election in the city of Burbank. Constantine Anthony, please stand up. He's a true friend and a courageous voice who happened to take a courageous stand and pulled his endorsement of Adam Schiff when Adam, you know, disappointed all of us in terms of what's going on in Gaza. And so we need to, there are so many jewels in local government, in state government that we can find, and that is the constituency that we need to build. And in the words of Martin Luther King, we are working for nonviolent coexistence so that we can defeat violent co-annihilation. That's what we're working for, is the non-violent coexistence, and that starts with having coexisting narratives. Don't just accept the dominant narrative. There are so many narratives out there that we have to advocate for and push on the national stage so that we have a clear understanding of how to work for justice.
One of the fundamentals of politics is not just who we elect, but to reform the consciousness of the electorate. One of the greatest 20th century judges who never made it to the Supreme Court, Learned Hand, once said, "When freedom dies in the hearts and minds of men and women, no constitution, no court can save it." The reason why the religious right has the power it does have, the reason why people despise non-believers and might even despise people of different beliefs, is because of the notion that people who believe differently or people who don't accept a supernatural being are morally suspect. We must have a renewed enlightenment in America in which we are able to demonstrate that a person's views on how the universe is put together does not in any way affect the kind of morality, the kind of decency, and the kind of ethics that they will display in their lives. And the more that we can get large numbers of people to see this, the more we can get them to stop hating the other just because of different perspectives on metaphysical questions, the more they themselves will start to reject theocratic candidates. But it's never going to work if even a vast plurality of the voting public believes that there are certain religious prerequisites to even being a trustworthy person. We need, once again in America, to bring back Enlightenment concepts and to learn to trust each other irrespective of the difference in cosmic views of existence. And unless that happens, these religious-based prejudices will continue and they will poison our election process.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So this is it.
This is it.
So genuinely what gives me hope is to dream of a world where we can all live as our authentic, vulnerable selves and be equal, full expression of who we are. And that is truly the world that church-state separation invites and lays a foundation for. So what gives me hope also is to come together with this incredible group. And I really want to thank you, Reverend Mike, for offering your church and inviting us all in. Thank you so much.
Anytime. It's
amazing.
Churches are sacred public space. This is at your disposal anytime you need it.
I love that. And you all, and everyone online, you all give us hope. Because you showed up. I mean, you showed up, and after COVID, that's something to do, right? And so one thing that I'd like to end on, and I know this is kind of becoming a trademark thing of mine, but I just believe so strongly in the power of our voices, so I kind of want to hear your voices. So what I was thinking, because I do this a lot, is that I would say separate, and then you would say church and state, and that we do that together 3 times as like a conclusion to the night. Are you game? Yeah. All right, I know you haven't talked in a while, so clear your throats. All right, 3 times, here we go. Separate.
Church and state.
Separate.
Church and state.
Separate.
Church and state.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
And out there, thank you.
And out there. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. Thank you. It was great, huh? Thanks, Eddie. You were tremendous.
One, two, three, four, five. Over here. Cool. Found you. Found you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,